Hi everyone, this is the first lecture of week 8, and again you can listen to this as an audio, though I've been told no one's doing that, so whatever. And again, it would be best if you have read Exodus 32 through 34 before you listen to this lecture. Indeed, after this point in the semester, there's going to be way more text and way more stories than I will be able to discuss in the lecture videos. And so as a result, the materials from Coogan, especially the definitions of particular bolded words, right, which are all defined at the end of Coogan's book, as well as materials from the biblical text, though I do not talk about them in the videos, they probably will appear on your quizzes, okay? So you want to definitely be keeping up with the readings from Coogan and the biblical text, and not necessarily just relying on these videos to feed your information. Again, I do want to emphasize that part of the point of this class is that you read the biblical text, right? So if you're not doing that, you're again only taking my summary, okay? And that's, though my summary is good, you want to be reading the text for yourself, okay? So the stories about what happens once the Israelites leave Egypt in order to make their very long 40-year journey back to the promised land, that is the land of Canaan. These stories are found in the book of Exodus and Numbers, right? And both of these books, the Exodus and Numbers, are really a kind of composite book, right? They're filled with stories, like I said, about Israel's time in the desert. They also have some laws in them. They have some lists in them. I'm going to talk about law codes in the next lecture. But in this lecture, I'm going to focus on one famous story in the book of Exodus, okay? In a later video, I might get to some interesting stories from the book of Numbers, okay? Now, there are lots of interesting stories in both of these books that I do not have time to go over in class, right? As you know, notice how we haven't made it out of the Pentateuch or Torah yet. So just again, just a warning that the class is going to speed up, and it is now at this point much more imperative that you start reading the materials in the biblical text as well as the summary of materials in Coogan, okay? So when we left off, the Israelites had made it out of Egypt, right? And were headed towards Canaan, the promised land, via a rather circuitous or scenic route. And as soon as the Israelites are out of Egypt, however, they begin to complain mainly about food and water, but about a variety of things, right? This is in Exodus 16 and 17. Okay. Notice that the provision of food and water is connected to being a good leader, a kind of fertile leader, right? So in some ways, the people have a right to demand this, okay? And to this kind of constant complaining and demand, Yahweh's response is, well, it's kind of mixed, right? Yahweh is depicted as both loyal and somewhat patient at times, providing the Israelites with a variety of foods, such as manna in Exodus 16. Of course, it's called manna, we are told, because in Hebrew, manna means, what is this? Okay, they don't know what it is, right? Okay. In chapter 17, for example, with water, right? They complain about a lack of water. Again, the Israelites do have some right to demand this. Notice that in that instance, Yahweh is not as patient, right? And the text tells us that Yahweh is indeed ready to kill them all, okay? Now, when God gets especially homicidal, okay, it's at that point that Moses steps in, right? And usually what Moses does when he steps in to prevent God from murdering everyone is to remind Yahweh of his reputation, right? That is, it would look very bad for Yahweh if he were to go and kill all of his own people, right? The other neighboring countries will look at this and say, well, he just took them out. That is, Yahweh just took them out into the desert to kill them all. What kind of God is this, right? So what Moses does is that he kind of lays apparent guilt trip on God, okay? At which point God backs off from killing everybody. And this would really epitomize the relationship between God, Moses, and the people of Israel. Okay, Moses would be the good cop to God's or Yahweh's bad cop. Okay. Now, it is this role that Moses plays as good cop, or fancy word for this, as an intercessor or go-between between him and the homicidal God. This will be in part why he would be envisioned as kind of the forefather to utter to other intercessory figures or occupations such as prophets and priests, right? And it is also because of this that that Moses is seen as such a figure of renown, especially in Judaism, because of his great role, unlike Noah, and even unlike at points Abraham, this role that Moses plays in telling God to have mercy on his people, okay? Now, by Exodus 19, the group reaches Mount Sinai, also known as Mount Horeb in other traditions, probably another source. And this is the same mountain where Moses first encounters Yahweh in the form of a burning bush way earlier in Exodus 3. And once the Israelites make it there, they start the covenant giving and making ceremony. Okay, whereby Moses goes up the mountain to get the covenant from the Lord. A covenant, as I stated before, is a contract or an agreement, right? One cuts a covenant, right? Because there's usually sacrifices involved in that. And the stipulations of this covenant or agreement or legal agreement entails the law or commandments, okay? What you're supposed to do, right? What you're agreeing to do. Like I said, in the next lecture, I'm going to discuss laws and commandments a bit more in detail, okay? From Exodus 19 through chapter 32, the Israelites, therefore, are said to be settled at the base of Mount Sinai, awaiting Moses' return with this contract, with the covenants, okay? And the stipulations, the laws, that is, of the covenant are described in Exodus 20 through 32, okay? And what you'll see when you start looking at Exodus 20 through 32 a little bit more closely is that the covenant or the stipulations, really it's a mixed bag, right? It entails some laws and commandments, that is, what you're supposed to do or not supposed to do, but lots of other stuff like directions on the cult, what the priests are supposed to wear, how they're supposed to make and carry the Ark of the Covenant, which is kind of like an important holy box, right? It contains some stuff and is envisioned as either God's footstool or his seat or maybe a symbol of his presence. It also entails, for example, directions on how to construct the tabernacle and carry the tabernacle, which is a kind of movable altar or temple. Okay, so again, we'll discuss the stipulations of the covenant in a bit, but just know that it is not simply laws, not simply things that you're supposed to do, but a lot of different materials, okay? Now, it is at this point that Israel is waiting for Moses to come back down, that things go off the rails, okay? And this is described as the golden calf incident in Exodus 32, okay? Even as Moses is in the midst of getting the commandments and the covenant from the Lord, we are told that the people are disloyally already looking for other gods to worship. Okay, and this is what it states in Exodus 32, verse 1 and following. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." And Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. And they took the gold from them, formed it into a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord." They rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel, or to party, basically. Okay. So, and while Moses is up on Mount Sinai getting the covenant, it states that the people start fretting and thinking that Moses is like lost or gone, and therefore demand that Aaron make them other gods, that is, idols. And of course, Aaron does so by making a golden calf. Okay, and we are told that that once this calf is made, that they start making sacrifices and offerings to it and begin celebrating. Now, as you can see, when news of this reaches God up on the mountain, who's having this executive meeting with Moses, okay, God is, understandably very, very pissed. Okay, so in Exodus 32, verses 7 and 14, we are told that he is so mad, God that is, that he starts getting ready to kill all the Israelites at this point, and even tells Moses, "Oh, by the way, why don't I just kill all of these bad children of mine, and let's just start over just with you. Okay, I'll just leave you." okay? At which point, again, Moses, good cop to God's bad cop, reminds God that it would look really bad for God if he were to kill all his people, and also reminds God, oh, by the way, don't you remember this covenant you had with the patriarchs, right? And in so doing, again, persuades a very pissed off deity to back off from his homicidal tendencies, and at which point it states in chapter 32, verse 14, and the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he had planned to bring on his people. Okay, so notice the point of intercessors is to get God to change his mind. Okay, and notice that this God is one who changes his mind. Okay. At this point, Moses, regrettably, now has to head down the mountain carrying the 2 tablets of the covenant, which are probably on stone and therefore kind of heavy, to see what is going on for himself, okay? And when he sees what's going on, we are told he throws down the tablets, breaking them, okay, because he's so upset, okay? Moses is like some parent who unexpectedly comes home to find that their kid has thrown a giant illegal party, okay? And once he finds this, he confronts Aaron, who I guess apparently is the babysitter left in charge, as to what the hell has been going on, right? So this is chapter 32, verse 21 and following. And Moses said to Aaron, what did the people do to you that you have brought so great a sin upon them? And Aaron said, do not let the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, they are bent on evil. And they said to me, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. So I said to them, whoever has gold, take it off. So they gave it to me. And I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. Just great response. Okay. When Moses saw that the people were running wild, for Aaron had let them run wild to the derision of their enemies. Then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side? Come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered around him. And he said, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, put your sword on your side. Each of you go back and forth from gate to gate throughout the camp, and each of you kill your brother, your friend, and your neighbor. And the sons of Levi did as Moses commanded, and about 3,000 of the people fell on that day. Okay, so party's over, right? And remember, this kind of alludes back to Genesis 34, where we have seen Levi, right, sort of be violent before, okay? So the party's over, and for good measure, right, this is not it, right? God is still pretty pissed about this, right? And we are told that as a result, not only is a bunch of people killed, but God doles out one more final punishment in Exodus 32, verse 35. Then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made. Okay, so there's a plague, that is sent afterwards. I mean, I don't know how many people are left at this point, but whatever. Okay. So lots of interesting things to notice here. Okay. First, notice that this is definitely a pro-Moses, a pro-Mushite, okay, anti-Aaron story. Okay. Aaron comes off very, very, very badly here. Okay, and again, this story, like others in Exodus, seems to hint of some inter-priestly competition and squabbling. Okay. Second, if you read your intro book by Coogan, he argues that the story reflects other rivalries and competitions, okay? And the main one, again, and you've seen this before, is the competition or rivalry between the South, okay, South Israel, sometimes called Judah, and the North, okay, sometimes called Samaria, or simply Israel, confusingly, okay? We are told that when the North and the South split and become 2 separate countries, that the Israelites who lived in the North for a very long time are forced to go to Jerusalem, which is in the South, for their festivals, big sacrifices, okay? However, this is deeply problematic. Okay. Not only is religion big business, right? So you have all these northerners going up to Jerusalem in their pilgrimages and spending all their money there. Okay. But since Jerusalem is in the South, this kind of also makes the North look bad. It delegitimizes them. okay? It makes it seem as if it's only the Southerners who are all like holy and stuff, while the Northerners are not. And indeed, the South would continually see and portray in their texts, okay, the Northerners as apostates and heretics, okay? So the king of the North decides to do something about this, right? To combat this, he opens up two rival cultic sites, one in Dan and one at a place called Bethel, which means house of God, which was probably a very, very old, probably Canaanite holy site, okay? And what religions do is they just build holy sites right on top of one another, okay? Um, and he does this so that now the Northerners have northern place to go worship, sacrifice, spend their money. Okay, and not only that, we are told that this king, in front of Dan and Bethel, placed as a kind of marker, right? Like you see in like front of Chinese restaurants, you see these like lions or something. Okay, he places golden calves in front of these cultic sites. Okay. Coogan argues that this story about the golden calf in Exodus 32 is really referring to this kind of northern opening of the northern cultic sites, right? Coogan argues that originally the story in Exodus 32 was a northern tale justifying why worshiping at Dan and Bethel was just as good as worshiping in Jerusalem. After all, according to the story in Exodus 32, it was founded, right, by the famous Aaron, right? He was the one who establishes the golden calf thing, okay? Later, when the North and the South split, the story is reformed, re-edited, right? And the calf incident is transformed into a very negative tale, okay? And then probably you can go on when the priestly editors get a hold of the story even later. They probably don't love how badly their forefather Aaron is portrayed, and so they edited it, edited the story a little bit so he looks just a tad bit less bad, though still pretty bad. Okay. Now, in talking about Aaron and his weird portrayal here, and about Coogan's argument that this was originally a positive story, you may be asking yourself, well, how is this possible? I mean, the story looks and feels just completely negative, right? I mean, the people are into like making idols, right? That's kind of bad, right? Well, actually, it's a little bit more complicated than that, right? And there's some clues that still linger in this text that may hint that originally this tale was, as Coogan argues, much more positive, okay? Notice that anytime you see the word that's translated God in your translations of the Bible, in Hebrew, it's always, this word God is always in the plural. It's the translators who's making a decision as to whether they're going to go plural or singular with this, okay? So what this means is that when you read lines, such as the people gathered around Aaron said to him, come make gods for us, or, verse 4, Aaron took the gold from them, formed it into a mold, cast an image of the God, and they said, these are your gods, O Israel. Notice that you could translate this differently, right? You can take the gods and just put in God, singular, right? Come, make God for us, who shall go before us. Or here is your God, O Israel, okay, instead of God's, okay? In short, it is not clear with this word Elohim, okay, whether the people, right, are asking for other gods, plural, or whether they're referring to God, singular, the God who they think brought them out of the land of Egypt, okay? Indeed, there are other clues that the Israelites were not necessarily trying to worship other gods per se, but was actually in the midst of putting together a kind of surprise party for Moses and for Yahweh to celebrate this new covenant between the people of Israel and Yahweh, okay? First, and these are the clues, right? First, there is the golden calf, okay? Which again here, as we have it in the text, is portrayed as something very bad. However, all gods, including Yahweh, had like animal emblems, just like sports teams or like high schools have. Okay, and Yahweh's animal emblem, interestingly, was, guess what? A bull, right? That is a male cow, or vice versa, whatever. Okay, and why was Yahweh's emblem a bull? Well, bulls are like virile, and they're like super tough and buff and strong and full of power and rage, and God's a little bit full of rage here too. Okay, so like pretty fitting animal emblem for Yahweh, who is also super worried about his virility, so that fits too. Indeed, the northern cultic sites were not the only places where golden bulls were found. Rather, in 1 Kings 7, verses 44, which describes in excruciating detail the temple in Jerusalem and all the stuff that's in it, right? It states how in the temple there was this giant bowl of water, right, called the Golden Sea or the Sea, which was held up by 12 bull statues. Okay, and it is no coincidence that in the famous temple in Jerusalem for Yahweh, you will find statues of bulls. Why? Because, or cows, right? Why? Because they were a symbol of Yahweh. Okay. Now, at this point, you might say to me, well, Suzie, the golden calf is like an idol, a figure that symbolizes or embodies this God. And, you're not supposed to have like idols, right? And to this, I would say, it kind of depends on who you're talking to, actually. Yes, the Israelites, at least in the text that we have, seem pretty and iconic, not into idols, anti-idols, right? Just like the Protestants are, okay? But really, a lot of people think, me included, think that this is kind of a overreaction by the biblical writers or editors, okay? This is just what the clergy wants you to think, okay? And what I mean is that you have in the Bible a text that was edited and written by elites, lightly elite scribes affiliated with the priests, maybe the prophets, who are putting into this text their own agendas as to how, kind of their own imaginings as to how they want people to behave and live, okay? And it is these probably elites, these priests, who seem to have a real problem with idols, especially as the religion develops, okay? This is, however, what is in the text, right? The religion of the text is quite different from how people practice the religion on the ground, okay? And scholars think that all this kind of like no idol critique found all over the place in the biblical text, well, it kind of seems to hint of the opposite, that people were super into idols, okay? Indeed, archaeologically, you find lots of bull figurines as well as fertility figurines, with the kind of, big hips, objects, okay, all over Israel and Palestine. People like little objects to remind them of their God. It doesn't mean that they think this object is God, right? But, it's just that they like having reminders, right? I mean, if you go to a pilgrimage site, you are, it's clear that people like little objects, okay? But because the biblical writers didn't like these objects, they kind of mischaracterized them as idolatry and apostasy and false worship of physical, objects by idiots, okay? Notice that these groups, the priests, right, and the writers, have a vested economic interest in their critique. If people just sit at home with their own figurines, with their own private shrines to Yahweh, if they run their own little private Bible studies, right, and they don't need to go to church. And if people don't go to church, who's going to give the tithes to pay the salaries of ministers, right? And is it any wonder then that much of this kind of anti-icon stuff, the aniconic stuff, really comes after the point that the temple is destroyed. That is after this destruction of the one legit warehouse storefront where the Jerusalemite priests could make money selling these religious trinkets. It's after, their warehouse is destroyed that you really get very strong hints about how, you're not supposed to worship idols anyways, okay? So it's complicated, okay? Anywho, the final hint that the people in making the golden calf in Exodus 32 were not really acting super badly, but was probably trying to do something for God is evident in what Aaron says in Exodus 32 verse 5, right? Once the bull is made, he says, tomorrow shall be a feast for the Lord, right? And the Lord is translated, right? It literally says Yahweh. Tomorrow shall be a feast for Yahweh. And so Aaron makes explicit that this party is for Yahweh, okay? And all these clues seem to hint that indeed it is Yahweh whom the people are celebrating, for whom they make a giant portrait statue of, that they gilded and everything, right? And it is this positive story, okay, which for a variety of reasons gets transformed into a negative story about how the Israelites were such, they were so flaky from the very beginning that God tried, but at the end, of course, they just deserved to be destroyed and exiled, okay? And again, here is the final reason for why this positive story was turned into a negative story, right? Hindsight is 20/20. Okay. And we know that Israel ends up destroyed, its people exiled. The negative transformation of the story is like when someone hears of someone, their friend's divorce and says, well, I knew from the very beginning that relationship was doomed. When anything goes bad, it's really easy to look backwards and see signs of it, okay? Everyone is an accurate fortune teller in hindsight, okay? Something like that is going on here as well. Looking from the point of exile, from the point of destruction, the story about the calf becomes a hint, a foreshadow, okay, of the destructive, terrible ending between God and Israel that is to come.